Hi, my name's Sarah. Before lockdown, we were a family of, well, I had one daughter and married Jonathan in November, and we had another daughter just about to be born. Really, I think I first began to become aware of COVID in the January time. There was a bit in the news about China, and I remember watching it with my dad, and my brother came in saying, "Oh, this is scary. They're building this hospital in a week," and you're kind of thinking, "Oh, that must be quite serious." But it's the other side of the world, so you don't really think. Obviously, it's something bad over there, but you don't think it's ever something that will affect you really. And so, kind of all throughout January, you knew it was happening, but it was always elsewhere. It was never something that was happening to you. And then obviously it came a bit nearer to Italy, and you thought, oh, that's bad. It's happening in Italy as well. That's a bit closer. And you hear a couple of cases in this country, but even with a couple of cases in this country, you kind of think, oh, it's just a couple of cases. It will be fine. Never in a million years would you have expected what actually eventually happened with it. So Eva was due on the 1st of April, and she was born on the 26th of March.
Okay. And I understand you were poorly yourself before she was born.
Yes, I think it was about 4 or 5 weeks before she was born in February. I was really ill. Didn't really know what was wrong, like kind of flu-y symptoms, but it just completely knocked me out. I never take days off work. I don't really get ill, to be honest with you. And I got ill and I just couldn't work out why I couldn't get over it. But then I was heavily pregnant. I had an iron deficiency, so I just put it down to that really. But I was in bed for kind of 2 weeks, and then a couple of weeks after that, I just had absolutely no energy whatsoever. So, but I thought it would never be COVID, because all you really heard about the COVID was people that were dying. You didn't hear about the people, well, firstly with no symptoms or people with mild symptoms. My symptoms, I was really ill, but I never would have believed that it was that at the time. But then looking back, I had a cough that just would not go away. Kind of even when I was starting to get better, this cough was just there constantly. So it could have been, who knows? I'll probably never know. But yeah, I was really ill, kind of in the lead up to the point I was kind of thinking, I'm going to give birth in like a few weeks. I physically would not be able to do it while I feel like this. So I was scared of going into labour early, because I was early with Rose. But luckily I kind of got over it a bit. It was really just the week before, kind of the days leading up to when Eva was born, that I started to kind of feel kind of stronger and like I could kind of deal with that. The lockdown announcement was on the Monday evening, and then Eva was born on the Thursday, so I went into labour on the Wednesday evening. It did a bit. So the week before, I finished work a week before I gave birth, and I remember there was an announcement that weekend about pregnant people are kind of vulnerable groups and should isolate, and kind of thinking, oh, well, I need to go into work because I've got to sort my stuff out, and I only had like 3 days left, so I ended up going in on the Tuesday, kind of just clearing my desk and doing a few bits, and the Wednesday I worked from home and I finished a day early. But I remember my friend saying, you can't go into work, and I'm thinking, I'm fine, I'm sat in a desk, it's not a particularly kind of closely packed in office, I'll go in for this day and then I'll work from home. But it all still didn't really feel real. Almost, I feel awful saying this, but almost like a bit of an overreaction. I suppose I'm a bit of an optimist. I kind of don't think it's going to kind of happen. And so that was the week before. It was kind of a bit weird, and then the lockdown came on the Monday evening, and I had a midwife appointment on the Tuesday, and that appointment was, because that was my next midwife appointment from when kind of it all started to get a bit more real. And I remember going in, and it was just so strange. So I knocked on the door, and the door was locked. Somebody came to the door in full kind of PPI, asked who I was, went back inside to make sure I was allowed in. So then I was kind of allowed in as the only one in there, or went into the midwife's office. And it's all very strange, like trying to have a midwife's appointment while you're trying to socially distance when she's got to take your blood pressure and things like that. So you're kind of like skipping around the room. And it just felt so strange. I think that was the point that it really kind of hit home, that it was like a real serious thing, because we were talking about, oh, who's going to go into the hospital with you? And obviously I said my husband, Jonathan. But I had a little girl, and like, oh, who's looking after your little girl? And I said, well, her auntie. Does she live in the same household? Well, no, she doesn't, but there isn't anyone else that lives in the same household. Oh, well, she won't be able to come round then. And it was just kind of, I remember coming out at that appointment feeling really upset, because I was like, well, I can't go on my own. I can't do this. And I was told that Jonathan would be allowed to come to the birth, but it'd have to leave straight afterwards. So I was like, oh, so will he even get to hold the baby? Or, is it literally, will the baby be born, he has to leave? Like, oh no, he'll get to hold him or her, but then he'll have to go straight away. So it'll probably just be like a few minutes after she's born, he'll be straight out. And I remember thinking, oh, that's going to be really, really strange. But it turned out when we did actually go in, like he could stay for a little bit longer. He just couldn't come up to the ward. But yeah, it all started to feel a bit strange, kind of from the lockdown being announced on the Monday, from that Tuesday, it was all really, really weird. Yeah, so the birth itself surprisingly felt really, really normal. I think I was quite lucky with that, but I think because it was so early into lockdown, the midwife wasn't wearing all of the PPE, so it did feel really quite normal. The centre I wanted to kind of give birth in the sanctuary, which is the midwife-led centre, which is where I had Rose, and but that wasn't available because that was being used for COVID patients. So I had to go to the main labour ward. So I didn't get a pool, but that was like that's fine. But I went in. You're almost kind of in a little bubble. It felt really quite normal. So I had Eva, and then Jonathan probably stayed. It's probably a good hour, a couple of hours. I think possibly because they didn't need the room. We're just in the room together. There's nobody else in the room at that point. So it was only when I went up onto the ward that he had to leave. And that was a bit weird because obviously like you've just had a baby and you have to kind of say goodbye and that's it. And that was strange. So being on the ward was the only bit, even though like you were in a little bubble in the ward, so you didn't necessarily feel like it was really, really, it's probably quite not that different to how it normally is. The only thing was kind of not having the visitors, but then other people didn't have the visitors either, so you were just kind of in a bit of a bubble, really. I think one of my concerns was like my hospital bag. I'd not envisaged staying in for that long, and I didn't stay in for long, probably. So I went up to the ward about 2:00 and I left about 5:00 the next day. But when I'd packed my bag, it was kind of pre-COVID, so I'd put like only so many nappies in, so many kind of little bits, thinking, if I need anything else, Jonathan can bring it. And I hadn't put any money in, and my toddler had broken into my hospital bag. I'd stupidly left it in her bedroom, and she'd found my Skittles, and I really was craving these sweets, but I couldn't get any. And I went up to the ward, and obviously I didn't have any money and I didn't have anyone to go and get me these sweets. So for the whole time I was craving sweets, which was like obviously nothing in comparison to kind of other things. But yeah, you were kind of in a bubble. The hospital, like all the staff were amazing, but it felt very normal. You were kind of protected from it all, really. Well, I think the strangest thing was not having Jonathan there, because when I had Rose, I didn't stay in hospital, so it was only my mum and dad that had come to the hospital, and everyone else we'd seen at home. And I was kind of we lost my dad in January, so I was kind of thinking, oh, it's going to be really sad having my mum visit on her own, or people visiting and him not being visiting in the hospital. So in a way, it was sad, but I was kind of, one of the things I was worried about was it being sad if people did come because my dad wouldn't be there. So I suppose it worked out. It was fine. Like I wasn't in for that long, but I was glad to get home and see Jonathan and Rose. After it all, I was very glad to get home because obviously you want to be around your family. You just want to kind of. My mum had got the letter to say that she had to shield on the Tuesday, and she didn't expect that at all. And I think. My mum got married when she was 19. We lost my dad in January, so it's the first time she's ever lived on her own, and she felt really, really isolated, and that was really hard, not being able to go and see her. And you've got a baby, and you want to take your baby to your mum to kind of, to introduce her so she can have a cuddle, but you couldn't do that. And for me, it was more like it sounds really awful, but I wasn't so worried about kind of Rose and Eva, because you didn't hear really so many cases of children and babies getting it, although there have been some. But it was more, how awful would you feel if they, because we've just been in the hospital as well, and actually when we were coming out there was a woman in a lift in a wheelchair with all breathing equipment, and I think that she probably, I don't know, it was an elderly woman, and you kind of think you have been kind of in that environment where it's most prevalent, so you don't want to pass it on to older relatives. So it's more for their sake that you're kind of protecting them, really, more so than yourself. But yeah, that was really hard not being able to see her. Obviously we did like the FaceTime calls and things, but it's not the same. So yeah, that was kind of a sad thing about it, especially because it was for so long. So it was kind of towards the end of May that my mum saw her, and Jonathan's dad was 80 in that time, so we went and sat in their back garden when he was 80, kind of middle of May. But I think that was probably one of the hardest things about it, really. So we couldn't register at first because that was all shut down. So it was for ages like she couldn't be registered. So we were able to, the things that, I wasn't able to open a bank account, not that she really needed one, but like just little things like that you need a birth certificate for. There was something that we were able to do, claim for child benefit. But yeah, that was very strange. But kind of when you could get appointments again, it's really funny. So they're doing appointments. I don't know what it's like now, but we got one quite early on when they started again. But they're like drive-through I get it confused, drive-through and drive-by. I was calling them drive-by appointments, which is something completely different. So drive-through appointments. So you basically you drive to the registry office and park nearby, and then they call you and do it on the phone, and then you have to go out and sign. So there's like a little table set up, but it was just me that went in. So just sign and pick up the certificate, and they tell you kind of, you know, probably don't open the envelope for so many hours. But that was really strange. Like, I think that's quite nice actually. I quite look forward to telling her when she's older. Oh yeah, we had a drive-through registration for you. But so yeah, there are some bits that you kind of think like, wow, it's like such a strange time. Like, what a story for her when she grows up. The fact that she was born right in the middle of this period that hopefully in the future will again be like unbelievable that it ever happened. Or so with Rose, my first baby, she slept so much at the beginning, and I remember being really worried, thinking, oh, I need to wake her up, she's sleeping too much. Whereas for the second, I was thinking, it's brilliant, they're absolutely fine sleeping, they're meant to sleep loads of age. So I was thinking, I'm going to clean the house, I'm going to get loads done. But obviously I had a toddler here that was just, and we started potty training a few days before she was born as well, which was stupid, but it just worked out that way. So actually Eva was quite chilled out and relaxed, whereas Rose was like this little hurricane. She's got a big personality, which she's absolutely brilliant. We love her, but she can be hard work, and she's absolutely besotted with Eva, which is lovely. It's all out of love, but you know, you turn your back for a second and she's on top of her when she's a newborn baby. She's got hands in her face and her mouth. I mean, there'd be no point sterilising any baby equipment with Eva because she has Rose's fingers in her mouth like half the time. So it was managing the toddler and the baby situation, because obviously the nursery was closed, so Rose couldn't go into nursery. So I think the beginning of maternity leave was quite different to how I imagined, because I was thinking, oh, I'm going to have loads of time just to kind of get bits done and do bits. Rose is going to be at nursery, and it wasn't quite like that. One of the things that I have really missed and still do really miss was all the baby groups and things. It sounds like such a little thing to kind of miss, but actually I got out so much with Rose and made so many like lovely friends, and I've still got those friends, but I was kind of wanting to do the same with Eva and go to lots of different groups and every day do something different, but we were just kind of stuck inside, and it was really difficult not being able to get out and have that break from the four walls. We'd do a half an hour walk, but Rose wouldn't walk very far, so it was just literally round the block once a day every day, and it was nice having Jonathan around, because it meant I could put Eva on the bed in there, you know, and so I could pay a bit of attention to Rose at times, but then at the same time it was harder in a way, because as well as kind of having Rose and Eva, if it's just the three of us, then I can like let them get on with what they want to really, whereas I had to try and prevent Rose from like breaking into his office and like overtaking his Zoom calls and screaming outside his room, because we had a whole bit of a potty regression, whereas every time she needed to go in the potty she'd be screaming, and so it was a bit of a nightmare at times, but they've got such a close bond, and I think that's really lovely. That will kind of carry on. Hopefully Eva will feel the same way. I think she does. She smiles when Rose is terrorising her, so I think she does love her in her own little way. She can pull her hair now, which is quite funny. I was worried before, because Rose is back at nursery now. She went back kind of mid-June, and I was a bit, because it's also, you need to consider like the social element of it. Obviously there's the virus, but then for a 2-year-old that's used to seeing her friends every day and going into nursery and seeing other groups of friends and seeing her grandparents, to all of a sudden her life completely be turned upside down. I was a bit worried about kind of how she'd settle back into nursery, but she toddled back in absolutely fine. She loved it, and she felt so grown up when she walked back in, because after 2 years she'd finally let me put her hair in a ponytail, so she had a little ponytail, and she walked into nursery, and she absolutely loved it, and she just felt like she'd grown up so much in those few weeks. It was really kind of sweet to see actually, but yeah, she loved it so much. So she goes into a nursery on a Tuesday and a Wednesday. Thursday she had a day with me, sitting eating dinner on the Thursday evening, and she said, can I go back to nursery tomorrow? So I was thinking, oh great. But yeah, she seems to have adapted really well, and she's still as kind of mad and as crazy and as chatty as ever. And I hope that Eva's the same really, because obviously she's not really had that much interaction with other babies. She's had a bit now since we've been able to meet with friends for walks on the park. I've got a couple of friends that have got babies like similar ages, and that's been really nice. But I think Eva's so used to having Rose in her face, she's not going to be kind of shy, and hopefully she's so yeah. And I don't really worry for them. I just look forward to it being a bit more normal for them, because it's just really really strange times. And even I find now, like, there's been times where really, like, I should have given my mum a cuddle, but I don't think I have given her a cuddle, like, since. And we've buried my dad's ashes. We've done, like, all. My granddad's been in hospital, he's gone into a home now, kind of all during lockdown, so we weren't able to see him for weeks. Just saw him for the first time on Wednesday. And so there's been a lot of kind of really quite highly emotional things, and maybe that's just because I'm a bit cold, I don't know, but I've not given her a cuddle. And you just kind of, you don't do those things, and I don't want them to be like that. I want them to kind of almost never know that it's happened.
Yeah, you want to protect them from
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
So, I mean, Rose just would say things like, "Oh, we're doing nothing again today," and I'm like, "Yeah, we're not." But she didn't really ask that many questions. It was just like, "Oh, we can't go out, we can't see your friends," and she didn't really ask. And I didn't want to tell her, because I don't want her to be scared of germs or touching people or cuddling people. I don't want that to be a thing. I don't want her to be really kind of like held back. And so while I was quite lucky that she's young enough that I don't need to explain very much to her. I'm going to explain as little as I can. And there was, before she went back to nursery, I was thinking, should I explain to her a bit that it's going to be a bit different, and, you know, she has to wash her hands a bit more. And I didn't really prepare her that much for it, because I kind of thought the less I can get away with telling her, the less that it will affect her life moving forward. And nursery have been brilliant. I mean, you can't social distance from a 2-year-old, and, you know, if they fall over, you're going to give them a cuddle, and they've just been great. They spend a lot of time outside. So she comes home, she's absolutely filthy. She wears socks, her feet are white up to her ankles, her legs are grey, and then where her shorts are. So they're just outside all the time, having a brilliant time, playing with her friends. And I don't want her to necessarily dwell on the other bits. So, yeah, I mean, you have to take the positives, and the fact that we can spend that much time indoors and we're still married, almost a year now. Yeah, I think it makes you appreciate just life and everything. And yeah, you do have some really crappy things that happen, but at the same time you have brilliant things that happen. And it seems that it's been that way kind of before lockdown. We've had some in the past year, you know, we found out I was pregnant, we've been married, we've had Eva, we've lost my dad, my granddad seriously ill. But, you know, like, at least throughout all of the horrible stuff, there's good stuff that happens as well. And you know, we're a happy little family, and you appreciate the time that you spend with your wider family as well, and you really look forward to seeing them and doing more. And I think people will appreciate a lot more after this, hopefully. But then maybe also you're a little bit more careful with things. I don't know. I think the way people have been kind of communicating via Zoom, and, you know, Jonathan did a couple of quizzes for his wider family, and that was like quite good fun, and just different ways. I think work will be very different. I think employers will be a lot more understanding around kind of family, and, you know, people probably more working from home. I hope it doesn't go too far in that way that everyone's working from home, because actually that social element of being in an office and kind of interacting with different people is something that we risk losing. But no, I think there will be a lot more flexibility and a lot more appreciation for the good stuff.
So the last thing I'm going to ask is, given that she is very tiny and might see this video in like 10 years time, can we, if it's all right with you, please say no if you don't want to, get Eva on your knee and smile at the camera? That feels like the right
Hopefully
thing
she'll
to do.
smile.
We will.
Here she is.
We'll get Daddy here to make her smile. Hello,
hello.
You.
Is Daddy going to make you smile? There we go.
Eva.
Seems to have gone so quickly this time. It's a long time since she was a newborn.
Oh.
You're 5 months tomorrow, aren't you?
Yay! I just thought it'd be nice to have her on camera, so that when you look back on this, you can.
Oh.